dive into our conversations. I would like to begin by posing one of the first questions today for all of you, which is which we as designers, like systems thinkers, always think about. Please feel free to take the stage. I wanted to ask, what has been and what are the most challenging aspects that you have faced as a service designer or systems thinker or strategist in your careers and in the industry that you're working in, and how have you navigated those difficulties or challenges?
If anyone start, I'm happy to kick things off if that's okay. Yes, and so I've worked in all different types of organizations, big, small, public, private, across different industries around the world. And I think some of the hardest places to work is when you're the service designer, the first one coming in, and you have to set the precedents of what is service design, educating people to think differently, to think not just end to end, but holistically around the problem, and get people to move their thinking around just how a problem or challenge can impact one person and how it can impact multiple different people within the said organization and outside. And it's also trying to explain what you do sometimes over and over and over again, because service design is not always a common term depending on the industry and the maturity of that organization.
I would like to continue. I totally agree with you, Daniel. I think also the hardest part is that when you work for businesses, they speak business language, and they want you to speak language that sometimes we as designers don't speak. I don't personally speak that language, and I face that in the sustainability field, in service design field. So I think it's really challenging to switch how you think, because you're trying to communicate the value of we're designing services. This is good for you, it's good for your clients, it's good for your business. But then they're like, tell me what is the ROI, tell me what is the percentage of efficiency. And I don't think in those terms. So I think that's quite challenging when you're trying to especially sell and being, I'm trying to open businesses in Saudi Arabia. And I think it's a immature market regarding service design, and starting to open that path, is quite difficult.
Thank you so much, Anna and Daniel. What do you guys think, Arun and Omar? What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I'm not working in the major cities of Italy, where I'm based. So I'm working in smaller communities, and very often to get into the organizations and the industries, of course, you need someone to open the door. But that's only the first step. The hardest step is getting everyone else that maybe are not that educated in what service design is yet. So you have to get over that first resistance of collaborating with people that you've never collaborated with. Getting people that have never sometimes been involved in a collective and a participatory design process involved. And that's and when you get over that, it's really an enormous satisfaction, because you see people that haven't been engaged before at these at this level, and they manage to actually contribute in an important way. That becomes such an important step, not only for them, but for the whole group, to understand how adapting service design methods can actually create an important change and difference.
Yeah, I'm just adding my 2 cents over here. With my experience working in 2 large organizations, I think I see that role of advocacy as 2 key journeys. So the first key journey is, as Amar rightly suggested, getting that buy-in from the C-suite or the executive sponsorship. And the second journey is like, how can we blend our work with the middle management and with the tactical teams, because that's where I think majority of work service designers tend to do. So if we could kind of have those two journeys laid out, and then run experiments and pivot, and not use the word service design, I think that really opens interesting doors. And as Anna mentioned, as service designers, we are looking at to solve problems. And if an organization has a process teams or they have transformation teams, I think those are great opportunities for us to showcase our work value and work closely with them. Thank you.
I'd just like to add to that an important and almost constant step in companies that haven't ever adopted service design is the onboarding phase. It's the which is always a training phase, and training phase would mean working with mostly middle managers and managers that would then become ambassadors to spread the approach to the rest of the company. And however, that isn't an easy let's say moment, because people understand that the process requires an important step back. It requires the change in perspective, the need to invest more in terms of time, resources, and not only a change of perspective in that famous systemic sense we're talking about also.
I would like to add also that I find it's interesting, this idea of not saying service design, like not mentioning the word, because I've been feeling lately that the world of CX is like taking over the kind of work that we've done as service designers. And they have been somehow able to communicate the business value better than us, the service designers. And so when you go and you talk to a person, a manager, and they start talking about journeys, you feel that they're very focused on something that is very specific, and they place the whole value on the customer journeys. And then I just feel very frustrated, because it's why have we lack of the way to communicate better what we do as designers? And I also feel that we as designers, we are not seen as strategic in companies. Like, we usually are part of a team that does like beautifying things and are like under the shadow. And I feel that has also affected how we are perceived when we come to a company and we say, hey, hello, I'm a designer. And they think that the only thing you do is to do pretty things. So two things: the CX taking over the value that we can take, and then we as designers not being really value for the value that we can bring to the companies or the organizations.
I really love that thought process, and part of me disagrees and another part really strongly agrees. One, it's where's the role of service designers sometimes, and I'm on the camp of it's not just about the title, it's about what you do and how do you impact the business depending on the size, the type of industry, and how they perceive service design over time. I know there is a little bit of friction when you might go into a CX team, or my role, I'm the head of senior experience strategy, which is service design, but there's also a lot more that's in my remit as well. I think the key thing you have to always find, and this goes beyond just a job title, what service design does, whether you're fighting against CX or you're just the first service designer, is understanding who are the key people across the business that really get it and really understand it. And then they'll start to stop and say, wow, there's only one of you. We need about 5. I've had the same type of conversations this whole week where once we've had coffee with each other, I always say that I try to be a corporate therapist at some point. So I try to listen, understand, and connect the dots rather than just jump to a solution. Sometimes it's really what is their problems and how this relates to other people. And this is where you start building those relationships within the business, but also start thinking about how you can create an ecosystem across not just the business, but maybe the industry, where you can see partnerships over time. The question around the role of service designers, I can see it always evolving. I'm not always a big fan of just this term service design, because I can see it can be a lot more. Yes, it's journey management in some levels. Yes, it can be very strategic. Yes, it can be helping to understand a North Star of developing roadmaps, or even just being a good storyteller and making sure that people really understand the connected experience or system that we're trying to help resolve over time. So there's a lot of things that can come out of just not just being a service designer, but thinking beyond that and how our role can evolve depending on the situation, the context of the people we help.
That's so insightful to hear you all. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think a lot of the designers here would definitely resonate with every word that you're talking about. So yeah, thank you so much. Uh, just to follow up on on what we have been discussing, you all of you have mentioned regarding business, which is a big part of what we are doing as service designers, or like designers, not to mention the word service design. uh, like how like it's very challenging to influence. I think it's a big thing that I would like to refer to. So do you have like any examples or like references that you would like to share where you have overcome this thing about influencing the business, or bringing them in, like how we say, bring, like getting the right buy-in?
I was going to wait for someone. If not, I can go ahead again. I just don't want to be the first person to speak again. So just to go back to your question again, it's how do you get people to buy into a process or a way of thinking? Was that the question in terms of those elements?
Yeah.
So it is always about a mindset set shift. And I realize that different organizations, it might take time depending on the department, the way people think, and also understanding what their natural fears are. I talked about this before, but a big part of service design is just having coffees and just having one-to-one conversations with people first to understand their needs in a safe space, understand what they're thinking about. Maybe it might be for this year or this quarter, but also beyond that. So help them trying to think a little bit big picture. So this is where we start thinking about systems thinking and how we can think about the connect and disconnected elements of any type of complex problem. And usually what I try to do is try to create small working groups within the business where they can come together and have a common shared goal. A lot of this is through storytelling. It's around shifting their process of thinking about themselves and moving around how can we solve the problem. And it's less about what department you're in. And there's always going to be a level of conflict and level of friction, but it's understanding how do we come together to really focus on the real enemy, which is not people across different organizations, but it could be a complex problem. It could be a competitor coming in. It could be a huge deadline or milestone for the business itself. So getting that holistic thinking and understanding what is the outcome and what we're trying to measure. I'm actually trying to eliminate the term workshop from my vocabulary, just because workshops usually mean, I think a couple of people said this before, having fun, drawing pictures, beautifying things in some cases. I'm very much focused on how do we create measurable outcomes that can help us push forward. So I am shifting to more of a sprint mindset rather than just running a single workshop. There needs to be a sequence of events that can help people really buy into this is not just another fun day out of your day-to-day activities. This is actually going to drive a real business impact, short-term and long-term.
Yeah,
I also
I could share an example. So, so this was when I was a service designer at IBM, and I was the first service designer in the mainframe business organization. So I was new to service design, and there was a little bit of that challenge around that learning curve and adoption of service design. So luckily, we sent a survey to all the design leads and the content leads, asking looking. Do have a look at your customer journey and figure out which stages of the customer journey do you need some improvements on. And based on the responses, the teams identified that, okay, we are focusing on the onboarding and the usage experience of the product, but we don't have time to focus on the early parts of the customer experience. When I say early parts, I'm referring to like how customers discover, learn, and try out new product features. And 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 the insight was that like almost all teams agreed that that was a major pain point, but they couldn't work in terms of their project priorities. So based on that data, I was able to reach out to three different teams and work closely with the design lead to get the buy-in, and then we started the pilot projects. And the outcomes of the pilot projects led to these three teams creating new content touchpoints and updation of content touchpoints. So, in short, what I want to say is um, try to focus on the current customer journey and figure out which part of the customer journey would you like to improve, and perhaps take maybe a couple of stages that's low risk, and have some data to say that like, okay, this is a pain point, and I think it becomes easier for you to get that buy-in, and then that could be a starting step in terms of sowing a service design mindset.
I think you've touched on a very interesting point, Arun. Getting people to understand, to get into the service designer mindset of considering an experience as a sequence of moments of service, and how service design, with its holistic approach, with its also systemic, let's say, vision, has the let's say, task to bring the most value possible to every single service moment, from pre to post. And if they understand that, they also understand how it's also easy to lose a potential client, a potential user, in every one of those single service moments, or touch points, as we call them. And then at that point, they understand how important it is to have that vision of the whole user journey experience, and that's where it comes in very convenient to use a user journey map, or a customer journey map, or even a patient journey map if we're talking about health systems and so on. So getting them to use the word value, if they're not used to using it, is really a good way to get them to understand this work, the work we do, and what we try to bring to every single moment of the process in that journey.
As all of you are talking, I'm reflecting of like the previous moment in which you're trying to actually get somebody to like what you do or believe on what you do, and then I think that's another story once you're inside the company, and I think it brings its own challenges. But I think the moment before, and I'm still struggling again with Saudi Arabia in that field. Especially because it's difficult to tell what you do. It's difficult to explain everything without getting somebody bored, because again, they're waiting for the business value, the business numbers, and everything. So what I found that is of use to try to get in the door and to get people to understand what you do is to show cases of past work, where you explain what you did, what was the process, what was the value, who was in charge, what were the different roles around, what were the different departments. And I find like it, and if it's aligned with the industry you're actually talking to, I think that's a good way to actually get somebody to understand. Uh, but from that moment, like if they understand is one thing, and another thing is willing to work with you. But I feel that it's a complete journey. And I feel that we as designers do face a lot of challenges from the very, very beginning and all around the whole journey of the engagement, if you do get to do the engagement. So it isn't easy for the service designers. But I also feel, because I've been able to compare different markets, once the market understands the value of service designs, then everybody is requesting you to do something for them. Like the different companies, they just come and say, you know, we saw another company doing this and we want to do the same thing. So it is a stage to try to change the market and to educate the market. But once you do it, I think things get easier, but it isn't an easy start.
Maybe just sorry, go ahead, Danny.
Or just to really build on that comment, I think you'll be surprised how open people are to change sometimes. So I know there was a question in the chat regarding UK government and public sector. I've done quite a lot of work for different public sector organizations, some central, some that are agency, and some that are local government. One specific government agency I worked with, we were doing a big piece around how do we get the business more aligned on all the different projects and challenges that they're facing. So an issue was that they were working on all these different ideas in terms of discovery, going through alpha, going through beta. And they just didn't know when one project started and one project ended. They were wasting a lot of resources. We're able to get people from the business, people from architecture, people from digital, people from product in rooms to really start to make sense of what projects are linked together over time. There was a lot of pre-work where we had to interview a number of different stakeholders across the business who were the business owners for all different projects to make sure there's some alignment. And the outcome wasn't actually a experience map, but it was more of a network of all different projects and how they linked with each other, very similar to if you live in the UK at all, the London Underground tube map. That was our inspiration. So understanding how these different elements connect together was really key. And just to go back to Anne's example as well, I think we need to use cases of projects that have worked within the industry we're working in currently and also outside to give them some inspiration and different ways of thinking.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, I recall asking this question in the interviews, and as I was asking the question of like, how do you help to kind of create this buy-in, especially when, and it's something we touched upon earlier, service design might not be something that the stakeholders are necessarily familiar with, or they might have their own conception of service design. And, you know, when you say it, they're imagining it's this, and sometimes it might be different to kind of break out of that frame. And one of the answers, and unfortunately Anna Godoy wasn't able to join us today, but I really enjoyed her perspective, is that she just said that, you know, all of her answer was around listening. Actually, it wasn't necessarily on kind of the communication and the ways of doing that. Obviously, that comes afterwards. But you know, one thing which I took away from speaking to the wonderful panelists here today is that, you know, the ability to listen and the ability to empathize well in a way that, you know, is taking such a holistic perspective strikes me as kind of like a superpower, you know, for service designers, because not many, you know, whether you're in leadership, whether you're, you know, just facing a problem and everyone's telling you to fix it in this way, and you kind of have a sense, right, that there's a better ways of dealing with it. But having someone who's able to listen to you, you know, in that way, so holistically, and maybe in a position to help, can be super, super powerful. So something which I resonated quite a lot and just wanted to share as well.
I'd like to add, Bowen, and I'm glad you touched the issue of superpowers, which is honestly not an approach that I really believe in that much, in the sense that it's too easy among service designers to believe that it's just a matter of applying a process to anything. And sometimes it is, but more often I find in my work, working with public organizations, that we're asked to deal with really, really complex issues that maybe we're not familiar at all with. You know, juvenile crime, LGBTQ plus issues, and so many other issues where it is essential to, you know, to it's not enough to have, you know, the training of, in terms of the design process, the double diamond, or the, you know, design thinking, nonlinear process, and so on. So this brings to another recent issue I just heard about, which is co-facilitation. So as service designers, we're not always have the possibility to guide the group, to facilitate the group, and then we need experts not only in the group but next to us as co-pilots to help us in those very, very, let's say, deep issues that not necessarily we're into. So I'd be very careful about talking about superpowers.
Wow, that was really deep. Loved hearing you about like superpowers in the context of service design and systems thinking. That was great. I loved how Dan mentioned that we can be often be surprised when we see that people are actually open to change. So that was really wonderful. Yeah, which like brings me to another question that I wanted to ask you, which is like in the videos also Arun has mentioned about bringing people along on the journey of change. And you right now you guys are also talking about like how we can use certain methods or talk about influencing people on different teams when we are working together. So do you want to like throw some light on that, maybe like more about the change management and journey management that you have talked about in the videos as well?
Yeah, I can go. So when I was leading this 3 service design pilot projects, change management was totally new to me, and I was looking for frameworks, to help me get started. And luckily, I was able to find Prosky's ADKAR framework, ADKAR, and the best part of that framework was it was so easy to understand. I mean, for someone who's totally new to change management, the framework ADKAR stands for A for awareness, D for desire, K for knowledge, A for action, and R for reinforcement. And as I was leading these pilot projects, helping them understand there's a need for these pilot projects, increasing their interest, creating educational resources, so that they could learn and start using service blueprints. I also felt that like I had a internal change management journey, because even I was learning along with them. Often what I've seen, this is based on my limited experience, is that when you are trying to change a team or a process, there is a change management process journey involved. But internally, there is also a change management process that happens in the mind of this change agent or catalyst. And I think the best way is that this change agent should first be clear on that change management internally. And once they have clarity, then they should go to the team or the processes to start that change management journey. So I think that was a moment of a late reflection, but it really helped me. Yeah, thank you.
In my case, I've been, sorry, Daniel. In my case, I've been involved in a couple of projects on change management, but designing what it was supposed to happen. And I think what I found useful in those projects, first is a deep understanding of what's going on. And for that, I've applied systems thinking, which is very different, like the way that I was taught at school, that I was supposed to understand information was really through affinity. But applying systems thinking to understand information really brings to the surface things that are not so obvious. And I think that's the first step. The second step is to get the leadership team on board to embrace the knowledge that we just gained through the research. Because sometimes like in one of the projects that I work, biggest barrier was actually the manager of the change that was supposed to be like leading the project. And this person wasn't really open to hear what we had to say and what we learned through a deep understanding of the organization and the people. So I think those two things. The first thing is really to understand deeply what is going on and the root causes of what is happening and how that connects to the system and how that connects to the whole organization. And the second part, once you overcome the leadership and the blockage of the leadership, I think is really design the different elements that you're going to touch, right? Because what I've seen is that like newsletters and workshops, and there's really an opportunity to bring that creative side of design in the change and to get on board with people using very like non-traditional tools, like internal Instagram accounts where you celebrate people's change, and which is not really like normal, like organizations don't think on those terms. So I think it's very useful to use systems thinking and then just be very creative on how you're going to start tackling those things and making changes and flowing with what people are using today, like get a little bit away from that corporate stage and just try to engage them in different initiatives and strategies to trigger the interest and then the change.
That's amazing. I can go next if that's okay. So I've used a number of the key tools over time using design sprints. I think going back to what Anne said, being able to problem frame and align on what the key problems are, what we're trying to solve, what hasn't worked before and what has worked in the past is also important. Understanding that past context is always key. But if I go back into a project that I can actually talk about, just a lot of my projects are confidential. I've done a lot of work with Open IGO, which was used to be the social arm of IGO. We did a lot of work helping communities understand how to use systems thinking and design thinking as well. And one big case was looking at the future of food systems. So what would food systems look like in 2050, where we were able to apply systems thinking as well as using foresight work. So how do we think about the future as well as open innovation, bringing smart people across different parts of the world to come up with these ideas and develop almost a funding model to identify unique ideas from places across the African continent, Asia, Europe, the Americas, and think about just diversity of different ideas. The most important thing for that was one, how do we get all these different ideas where there were over thousands of concepts and try to think about what were the shared visions and be able to distribute that to the right people. Some of the tools we were able to apply were things such as how could you write a headline for the future? So how can you get people to think about what would the future look like in 20 or 30 years time, but also provide them with the tools and thinking. So we're able to create toolkits specifically for these different parts of the world where some would focus more a little bit on technical solutions, other would think more futuristic solutions. Some would focus on the cultural elements of the solution when it comes to food systems, because everyone around the world had different problems when it came to their food systems, whether it was they had issues in terms of they had a urban desert where getting quality food wasn't available for them, or some were just around how do you improve the supply chain of getting food to the right people at the right time. So it's really critical to just use a different range of tool sets to ensure that you connect people to the right problems and also understand how you can learn from different parts of the world.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on that. Really interesting. Just one more question for you guys. Like where when you're talking about different as per different projects that we're talking about, I think a lot of people are some of them are working for the private sector, some are for the public sector. So there's always this thing which arises when you're always like in different zones working in public sector or private sectors. So how do you allow, how has your experience been in terms of overall the impact of service design when it comes to public and private sectors?
I can start. I've worked in both the public and the private sector, and I'm going to focus more in the public. I think I used to lead the Smart City program for my city in Medellin, Colombia. And it was, and that was, I mean, 11 years ago. It wasn't like last year. It was a long time ago. But when the moment I arrived, they just didn't have the concept of services. You know, like the cities are full of services, you know, it's all services, but they didn't have the conception, the idea that you do need to design services. And that was a challenge at the moment, because even with the planning, we have a 4 year of the government. And when you do the planning before you start like doing the work, and everybody gathers and we plan the whole city for 4 years, there is no understanding when you do like establish your KPIs. There's no understanding that you need to design things before you launch them. And I think that was a challenge, because you do need to do the process before you actually do a pilot and then before you implement. So the city is full of like broken services, particularly because they buy things off the shelf and they just implement them because all these companies are like really wanting to sell to the government because it is a profitable business, right? So I think one important thing is that in the private sector, in my case, what I did was just like I had meetings with everybody in the board to explain in that particular area, health, education, safety, like the different areas of the city, the relevance of really sitting and trying to solve one problem that they were facing through service design, right? And of course, I was in a position where I could just go ahead with it, you know, like get people on board and get budget to develop things. But I think there's an opportunity, but there's a lot of change on the way people perceive the things and how things, like how to measure the things, because you can do an amazing thing and then you measure the wrong KPIs and then the service just breaks apart, right? So again, we go back to the initial part of the conversation of the challenges of being a service designer, and every sector and every industry, the private, the public, has its own challenges. But I do find that in the public sector, service design and strategic design has a lot of value. But again, we designers are not usually in these boards. We are not really like taking care of, or we are not taking being part of these conversations, because our role traditionally has been to beautify things and to be sitting behind the computer in a mouse with the mouse and just designing pieces. So my experience after those the years that I was there and trying to get people on board, at the end, I felt the satisfaction of people understanding and knowing that it is a great opportunity, but it takes the work of everybody being on board and aligning on what is the right process to get to a good result.
Fantastic. Fantastic, Anna. And just to reflect on what you've just said, so I've worked in public and private sector, and one project I did, which was in Singapore, was more focused on elements of working with the government, but working with a private insurance company. And the remit of the project was we wanted to reimagine healthcare across Singapore through behavior change and understanding the system of healthcare. So this was quite a complex project that I came in halfway through. I think some of the key learnings from understanding the project in the context was, if you've ever been to Singapore, there is a mix of local nationals. So we have people that are from Indian descent, Chinese and Malaysian descent. They all have different ways of thinking about health, where you look at the lens of eating well, thinking well, moving well, and sleeping well. You can't just attack a complex problem such as healthcare as we can give them this incentive or this one specific service can work. One of the big lessons that I learned was understand the cultural norms. One for how do I work with a private insurance company and also the government at the time to manage how this service could actually be launched, and how do we measure success? Having that shared learning and being able to make sure that we identify what we're measuring, what are some of the signals to show that we have the right type of indications, and what that output would look like, where we get benefits for not just the communities that we're serving from the local Singaporean perspective, but also thinking about the government. So they had a vision of reducing obesity by 2000, and I think it was 65. I can't remember the exact date. This was many years ago when I was working in that space. But there's also the element of how do we ensure that we were creating value for the private insurance company as well, where all three parties would win: the community, the government, and also the private sector insurance company. There were some challenges there. That was my first time ever being in Singapore, so there was a lot of things I had to rapidly learn quite quickly. If I was able to go there and do the project again, I think one of the key lessons were understanding how Singaporeans work and think, and understand it. You can't treat every person you meet all the same. They all have different needs. They all have different problems. They don't all look at the issues of healthcare at different elements, because they'll have different stages.
I just wanted to add my thoughts here. I just wanted to share my experience of working in the private sector. I haven't worked in the public sector, but what from my experience working in the private sector, what I've seen is success of service design depends upon which teams are you working with in the organization. The reason I say that recently, and I've seen a lot of job postings that call for service designers and senior service designers that report to head of product design, which sometimes is a little bit of a challenge because the skills of a UX researcher and service design tend to sometimes overlap when they are working on product experiences. So my interpretation is that if a service designer can join teams that's a little detached from design, maybe in the marketing side or in the change management office or in the transformation office or in the operations office, where there is a mandate from the leadership team to bring forth change, then I think those positions and those teams would be the best spots for service designers to succeed. Because what I've seen is it's not that service designers are not able to bring the change. It's more about like the environment and the teams they are part of. Because as much as the service designers can bring forth their toolkit, but if the environment around them is not open for change, service designers may struggle. So my key takeaway here is whenever you're applying for a service design role in a private sector, just check with them in terms of like what's their mandate, in terms of how well they can bring forth change, and what has their history in terms of change management initiatives for the past through 2 to 3 years. Looking at the history and looking at the present would give you an idea in terms of how open the teams are, and that could give you a little more of a clarity in terms of whether you want to join the specific team or not.
I can add something that intrigues me on the difference between working in the private and the public sector. Regarding the private sector, in my experience, I've seen mostly short to mid-term projects. So once you have the right people on board, the company leaders and so on, the work is pretty much straightforward. Everyone else, with the right tactics, will get on board and work will get done and so on. In the public sector, it's trickier. But it's more intriguing in the sense that you may start off with a certain group of people, with a certain government, and 3-4 years later, that government may change. And in the public sector, the projects are usually mid to long term in terms of duration. So this really makes a big difference. So what you have to do is you have to create a network of stakeholders that will support you in the very, very long term, even if the government, right, left, or center, inclinations change. And that means getting on board the commercial associations, the religious associations, and the important community leaders of all sectors, and create with them a team to make really important changes. And with them on board, and you can continue to work for many years, and without the fear of losing the people that will decide and make the difference. So once again, the systems approach and what we learn from that is very helpful in gathering and catalyzing those important stakeholders and keeping them on the team in the long run.
Thank you so much. That is really valuable. Yeah, a lot of people would like really be able to learn from all that you have shared right now. So yeah, I think we are close to the end of the session, but we have a lot of questions. I can just pick a few. Might not be able to go through all, but uh, so so someone has asked like about what are some of the most practical and actionable tools, methods, or way to communicate value uh, of systems, and how can those insights and opportunities be made actionable from a business perspective, whether for profit or non-profit.
Yeah, I can quickly go. I would say every team creates visual artifacts in some way. For example, the engineering team, they may create some technical architecture diagrams. Maybe the marketing team, they create a little more creative ways of depicting the customer problems. So maybe as a service designer, get an understanding of the artifacts they create and see if you can create a customized artifact that links to your understanding of the customer journey or the problem with what they are trying to solve, and be open to collaborating with them, and that could open as a first step, and hopefully that should open up new doors. So please don't get hung up on service blueprints or process maps. Just customize your artifact as to what your stakeholders are creating, and then I'm sure that the magic will slowly happen.
Anybody else wants to share anything? Okay, I'll quickly jump to our next question. There's one for Daniel as on the chat. Curious to learn more about how you explain what you do to others. Do you have a few sentences or elevator pitch you refer back in order to create this shared understanding?
I think a short version would be, I'm here to make your life better. That's what I always like to start with, and people's ears just always perk up. And because everyone has problems, and I'm here to listen and not solve it for them, but almost streamline what they do. In terms of explaining what server design does, I'm not a big fan of just using the term server design. I'm all about what is the almost the results, the outcome of server design. And in most cases, server design is you're streamlining something, you're connecting the visible and invisible elements of a service experience, a product, a system or ecosystem, and making sure it just all naturally works. My job is usually done once things just work flawlessly. Sadly, that's never going to happen. So I'm going to be working for many years. But I'm very fortunate to work with great companies. So it's either I make them their life a little bit easier, or I use the favorite restaurant example. Imagine your favorite restaurant. What are all the things that you care about? Okay, then what are some of the things behind the scenes that support your great experience? And then what are some of the strategic elements that that restaurant has to think about, from pricing to expanding to there might be some legal action where there's another code, for example, another outbreak. It's understanding all the different elements. That's what I usually do.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Uh, I guess one more question we can take, which is how can the impact of systems thinking be measured within a large system? In your work, are you able to also measure the service design backend quality? Please share some measurement techniques. Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining.
Yeah.
I think it's a very challenging. Go ahead, Arun.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, I'll just make it short. And also, Komal, just to answer that question indirectly, I would say rather than setting up frameworks for measurement in the first place, perhaps I think what we could look at it is from a systems thinking perspective is like how is the current culture in terms of collaboration and incentive setting and performance setting. And if we start applying the tools used in systems thinking to go down that iceberg model, or maybe even create some causal loop diagrams, understand the different dynamics, I think that would be the first most important step in understanding how things are measured, and like if we are to change how things ought to be measured, and then we could go about setting metrics. What I've seen is most teams just set metrics and expect everyone to follow, and that happens only at the surface level. So using that systems thinking first approach would really help. Thank you.
What I was going to say that it is a very challenging question. I've never had to face to measure the impact of systems thinking, because systems thinking in my case has been part of the back process that I'm doing. Like I don't come and say, I'm going to do a project of systems thinking and this is the outcomes. It's more like I'm doing research and I'm applying service systems thinking, and then I'm getting a deeper understanding, and that's going to contribute to the overall success of the project. And then you measure the project. But in my case, I've never really faced to have to measure what the impact of systems thinking is when I'm doing a project.
Omar, do you want to?
Oh, thank you. I'd just like to add a much simpler, let's say, approach, in the sense that I'm very keen in terms of qualitative feedback. So I think that very simply, periodical interviews to to not only perceive how things are going, what has changed, but also how the needs of people change along with in time also. So those also are good indicators of what not only needs to be fixed, but also what needs to be added if we want. So yeah, I prefer that approach as compared to keeping a check on KPIs or OKRs and such things, which of course are important. You can't do without those.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. This it has been like really valuable for all of us. Before like we end today's session, I just want to thank all of you for joining in. Thank you so much, our panelists and Vaughn, for doing this with the Design Hub. And please feel free to connect through the Miro board. And yeah, looking forward to our next events, such events. Thank you so much for joining. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Everybody.
everyone.
Bye.